The heat that summer was unbearable, the kind that made people do anything to escape the relentless sun, especially in Texas. We were all desperate to find some relief, and that's how I found myself agreeing to a camping trip with my friends. We were all from the same small town and wanted a break from the suffocating heat. Our plan was simple: drive west of town and camp by a river, hoping to cool off for a weekend. The river was a blessing. The air around it was cooler, and standing in the water, even just ankle deep, was pure heaven. We spent hours wading into the deeper parts where the current reached up to our shoulders, soaking in the cold water to forget the burning sun. The trees lining the riverbank helped too, with their leafy branches forming a patchy but welcome canopy above us. It wasn't much, but it kept the harshest rays at bay, making our little spot feel like a peaceful retreat. We thought we'd found the perfect place to escape the heat for a while, but things didn't stay peaceful. There were 4 of us: a firefighter, a welder, a guy who was trying to become a survivalist vlogger, and me, a line cook. We all had different skills, and under normal conditions, we felt we could handle anything out there. If we ever wanted to, we joked that we could disappear from society and make a life off the grid. But our adventure took an unexpected turn on the second night. After a long day of swimming and relaxing, most of us headed back to the tents to get some sleep. But the firefighter, always up for more, decided to take a late-night dip in the river. None of us thought much of it. The river wasn't dangerous, and he was a strong swimmer, so we figured he'd be fine. Just as we were settling into our tents, we heard splashing sounds from the river, followed by a grunt and a loud scream. We didn't hesitate. The 3 of us bolted out of our tents, but by the time we reached the riverbank, the firefighter was gone. The water was eerily still. We thought he was playing a joke on us. We called out, half laughing, expecting him to jump out from behind a tree, but he didn't return. Worried, we searched the area with flashlights, calling his name, but found nothing. As dawn approached, our exhaustion grew, but the fear was stronger. We kept searching as the sun slowly lit the woods around us. Finally, the vlogger found some tracks near the river, leading toward the parking area where our vehicles were parked. Relieved, we assumed the firefighter had gotten scared by something in the dark and bolted for the cars. We laughed nervously as we made our way back, but when we reached the vehicles, our friend wasn't there. In fact, his car was gone. We realized then that something had terrified him enough to make him drive off in the middle of the night, leaving his phone and gear behind. Before we could even process what had happened, we heard a sudden snap of a branch from the woods. Something heavy was moving behind us. It felt as if whatever it was had circled around, cutting off our path back to the campsite. Our gear, our keys, everything was still there. We tried to stay calm, telling ourselves it was probably just an animal. But then, a figure stepped out of the woods. It was not an animal we could easily explain. The creature looked like a man, but its face was unmistakably canine. Its eyes glistened wetly in the early morning light, and spit dripped from its sharp teeth. Its pointed ears flicked in the breeze, alert to every sound. When its gaze locked on us, the ears flattened against its head, and fear took hold of us. This had to be what scared the firefighter off. We couldn't blame him. The vlogger whispered that his truck keys were still inside his vehicle. If we could just reach it, we could get out of there. In a burst of panic, we sprinted. The 3 of us ran, and so did the creature, right behind us. We leapt over the hood of my car and flung ourselves into the vlogger's truck. He managed to slam his door shut just as the creature reached us, but 2 of us in the back seat weren't so lucky. A clawed hand reached for my leg as I jumped in. I barely pulled it inside in time, and the creature slammed into the truck's door, jamming its arm in the process. It howled in frustration, clawing at the window as we frantically locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and the noise startled the creature just enough for us to throw the truck into reverse and peel out of there. We didn't stop until we reached the firefighter's house. He was safe, though clearly shaken. None of us spoke about what we had seen, knowing no one would believe us. We stayed there for the night, all of us too scared to go back to the campsite. The next day, we returned only to collect our cars, leaving everything else behind. None of us wanted to risk another encounter with the creature we had faced. About 3 years ago, I moved to a new city. It was my first time in a big place, and I found myself in a small apartment near a park just outside the downtown area. I came for work, excited about a tech company that promised great things. But soon, I realized it wasn't as glamorous as I thought. My view from the office was just of an alley, and the days felt long and draining. I didn't know anyone in the city, and that first winter was incredibly tough. The cold winds felt like they could cut through anything I wore. To keep myself busy, I started jogging, even though it was freezing outside. At first, it was just something to do, but as the snow melted and spring came, I found that I really enjoyed it. Running became part of my daily routine, something I looked forward to each morning. Work was repetitive. I'd wake up, head to the office, sit through meetings, and code all day. If I was lucky, I'd have a quick lunch at my desk. Sometimes after work, I'd have a drink with some of my coworkers, but even then, the stress was always in the air. One morning, when the weather was still chilly but starting to warm up, I went for my usual run through the park. It was early, and the city was just waking up. The park had a certain vibe in the mornings. It was quiet, with the trees and flowers coming back to life after the winter. The skyline of the city loomed in the distance, creating a perfect contrast of nature and buildings. I loved that feeling, the peace of running with nothing but the sound of my shoes hitting the path and the occasional car far away. As I ran, everything felt fresh. There was mist in the air, and the park seemed to glow in the early morning light. The flowers smelled strong, and the damp earth had a scent that reminded me of new beginnings. The leaves shimmered with dew, making the whole place look magical. I felt like the park was showing off just for me. But that peaceful feeling didn't last long. As I continued down the path, something changed. I got this strange feeling, like someone was watching me. You know that prickly sensation you get on the back of your neck when you feel eyes on you? That's what I felt. The world around me seemed to go silent for a moment, and my instincts kicked in, telling me something was off. Up ahead, I saw something that didn't belong. It was a large, dark shape standing on the guardrail of a small bridge in the park. At first, I thought it might be a person, maybe someone trying to capture the sunrise. But the closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. My gut was telling me that something wasn't right. As the morning light grew brighter, I realized that what I was seeing wasn't human. It moved in a strange, unnatural way, like a shadow rather than something solid. And then there were the wings. Huge black wings that seemed out of place in the park, like they belonged in a nightmare. The creature's wings looked as if they had been forced onto its back, and when it turned its head, I saw its eyes. They were glowing red, not from the light, but with a deep, angry glow that made my stomach drop. I was frozen in place, my heart racing so loudly I was sure the creature could hear it. We stared at each other, me standing there in shock, and it watching me with those piercing red eyes. Time seemed to stop, and for a moment, everything went completely still. Then, without warning, the creature spread its massive wings and flew into the sky. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, leaving me standing on the bridge. The park around me looked normal again, but I wasn't the same. I ran the rest of the way home. I couldn't get away fast enough, and all I could think about was putting as much distance between myself and that bridge as possible. Hello, my name's Phil, and I've spent most of my adult life working in an office. You know the type. Long hours, staring at a computer screen, answering emails, and always feeling glued to my phone. It got to a point where I wasn't sure if my eyes were tired from blinking or if it was just the computer screen flashing in front of me. One day, I decided I needed a break. I had saved up plenty of vacation days, and I figured it was time to use them. I wanted to do something different, something that felt real. I chose a river cruise, not for any particular reason other than I wanted to see the open horizon for once, not another office wall. I found this week-long cruise along the Amazon River. Far from the world I knew, in the middle of nature. It felt like a great escape. No computers, no phones, just pure wilderness. I flew into Manaus, a city in Brazil, stayed the night in a small hotel, and the next morning, I boarded the boat. The boat wasn't fancy. It had a simple, old-fashioned charm to it. It was one of those small boats that promised a personal connection with nature. I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I was excited to find out. Now, I'm not the most outgoing person. I don't mind talking to people, but I'm happier on my own. So most of the time I stayed by myself, leaning on the boat's railing, watching the river. For 4 days, that was my routine. Wake up, have coffee, watch the water, maybe read a little, have dinner, and then go to bed. Of course, during the day, there were short trips off the boat to explore the rainforests, but mostly I was there for the quiet. One night, though, something strange happened. We were floating down a peaceful part of the river. The stars were out, and the sky seemed endless. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go outside and get some fresh air. I went to my usual spot by the railing, looking out at the dark water. The river was unusually still that night, like a mirror. It was almost spooky how calm it was. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something moving in the water. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again, closer this time. It was a shadow, a huge one, slipping through the water. Imagine being out there, in the middle of the Amazon, in the middle of the night, and seeing something in the water that doesn't make sense. It's confusing and a little scary. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I was looking at. The shadow started to take shape. I could see parts of it breaking the surface, long, smooth, and dark. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. Not a fish, not a dolphin. It rose a little higher out of the water, and I could see a long, winding body, almost like a snake, but bigger, much bigger. I stood there, frozen. There was no one else around. The only sound was the low hum of the boat's engines, and this thing, whatever it was, moved silently beside the boat. It had ridges or bumps along its back that caught the moonlight as it slid through the water. It didn't seem to care about me or the boat. It was just moving along like it had somewhere to be. I watched it for what felt like a long time. Time felt strange, stretched out like I was in a dream. But this was no dream. I was wide awake, gripping the railing so hard my hands hurt. Then, just as quietly as it appeared, the creature dipped back into the water and disappeared. The river was still again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a while, trying to process what I had just seen. My heart was racing, but my thoughts were jumbled. I thought about calling out to someone or telling the crew, but what could I say? Hey, I just saw a giant river creature. They'd think I was imagining things. And deep down, I didn't feel like it was dangerous. It felt like it was just there, passing by, minding its own business. Finally, I went back to my cabin, but I couldn't sleep. I sat down at the small desk in the room, turned on the light, and started writing. I wrote down everything I had seen, the shape, the way it moved, how quiet it was. I wasn't planning to show it to anyone. I just needed to get it down on paper, to make it real somehow. I stayed up for a while, pacing the room, thinking about what was out there in the river. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the creature again. But the water stayed calm, and eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. People were having breakfast, chatting and laughing. The rest of the trip, I stayed quieter than before. I kept watching the river, wondering what else was out there, just beneath the surface. I guess I got what I wanted, a real experience, something beyond my ordinary life. I've worked at Pinewood National Park as a ranger for nearly 10 years. Pinewood, with its calm rivers and towering trees, has always felt like home to me. Being a park ranger isn't just a job, it's something I was born to do. My mom was a ranger too, and when I was young, her stories about the park were my bedtime tales. After she passed away, I followed in her footsteps. I still wear her old hat and jacket, even though they're worn and a little too big. One cool fall day, I went out to check on a report of an injured deer near Clearbrook Meadow. A storm had passed through the night before, and some hikers said they saw a young deer that couldn't walk properly. I headed out alone, which is pretty normal for rangers. Of course, I let my team know where I was going, just in case. The sky was cloudy, and a light rain was falling, making the ground soft and squishy. When I got to the meadow, there was no sign of the deer, no tracks, no fur, and no sign of a struggle. Usually, injured animals don't move much, especially not a hurt deer, but there was nothing here. I decided to keep looking, moving deeper into the forest. After about an hour of walking, I came across something unexpected, a clearing I'd never seen before. I've patrolled this area so many times, but this spot had somehow remained hidden from me. When I stepped into the clearing, the air felt different, colder. The drizzle turned into a fine mist that seemed to hang in the air. The trees around the clearing were strange too. They were white, like they had been bleached by the sun. Their branches were bare, even though it was still early in the fall. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't a growl or a call, but something in between. It came from beyond the mist, and I should have turned around. But my curiosity got the better of me. I moved forward, my hands shaking a little. The sound grew louder, clearer. I heard something heavy moving, dragging through the woods. My first thought was the deer. Maybe it was hurt and trying to move. I quickened my pace. And then I saw it. But it wasn't the deer. It was something else. Its head looked like a skull with large antlers, and its empty eye sockets seemed to be staring right at me. I froze. It wasn't an animal I'd ever seen before. It reminded me of the creature people sometimes whispered about around the campfire, a creature from legends. A Wendigo, they called it. We stared at each other, though it didn't have eyes. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. After a moment, the creature moved, not toward me, but sideways, almost like it was gliding. With every step, it seemed to fade into the mist, becoming less visible until it was barely there at all. I watched as it disappeared into the forest. I could have gone back to the station, reported the missing deer, and forgotten the whole thing. But something deep inside me made me follow the creature. I wanted to understand why, after so many years, it had shown itself to me. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, I reached a steep ravine. At the bottom, I could see the entrance to a cave. The last faint image of the creature had gone that way. I took a deep breath and carefully made my way down. The slope was slippery, and I nearly fell a few times, but I reached the bottom safely. The air smelled damp and earthy, like rotting leaves. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped into the cave. The walls were covered in moss, and I could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere deeper inside. Then I heard that sound again, the same ragged noise as before. It echoed off the cave walls, making it hard to tell where it was coming from. I followed it, moving deeper into the cave, stooping as the passage narrowed. The cave opened up into a larger chamber, and there it was, the creature. It stood at the far end, its back to me, completely still. I approached slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would hear me. But it didn't move. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to see its bony frame and thin skin. It was terrifying, but also strangely fascinating. There was something about it that felt ancient, like it had always been part of the forest, like it belonged here more than I did. Without warning, it backed away and melted into the cave wall, disappearing completely. I didn't follow it this time. It felt like the right thing to let it go. In the middle of a vast ocean, there once sailed a grand ship called the Black Pearl. It was the pride of the seas, known for its strong sails and brave crew. For many years, it traveled to distant lands, carrying goods and stories across the waters. The ship braved countless storms, always returning safely to port, until one fateful voyage. One stormy night, the Black Pearl and its crew vanished without a trace. No one knew what happened to the ship or the men aboard, and over time, the world forgot about it. Many years later, a strange thing occurred. On a calm and quiet morning, the Black Pearl reappeared near the shore of a small coastal town. The ship looked old and worn, its sails tattered and its hull rusty, but it floated as if it had never been lost. The townspeople were astonished. How could a ship that had been missing for so long suddenly return? There was no crew, no captain, no sign of life. Yet, the ship was in perfect condition, as though it had just come back from a long journey. News of the ship spread quickly, and soon people from far and wide came to see it. The Black Pearl became a tourist attraction. Families, children, and adventurers all visited the harbor to walk on its decks and marvel at its history. The ship was open to the public, and people were allowed to explore its dark, creaky hallways and climb its tall, weathered masts. The mystery of its return only added to its charm. It seemed like the perfect adventure. But as more visitors came, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small, just whispers in the wind or the feeling of being watched. Some people said they felt cold fingers brush their shoulders when they walked through the ship's cabin, even though no one was there. Others reported seeing shadows dart across the deck, only to disappear when they turned around. These odd events were brushed off as tricks of the mind, stories to add to the ship's legend. As the weeks went by, the strange occurrences grew more unsettling. One night, a group of tourists stayed late to watch the sunset from the ship. They noticed faint lights flickering in the ship's windows. The harbor was dark, but the lights glowed as if the ship were alive. They watched in silence as the lights danced from one end of the ship to the other, then suddenly vanished, leaving only darkness behind. Rumors started to spread. Visitors claimed to hear the sounds of footsteps echoing down the ship's halls, even though the decks were empty. Some said they heard the distant sound of men shouting like a crew giving orders, though there was no one aboard. On stormy nights, the ship seemed to creak and groan, as if it were still fighting against the winds of the sea. One day, a tourist, curious to explore the lower decks, wandered down a narrow staircase that led to the ship's hold. As he reached the bottom, a cold wind rushed past him, chilling him to the bone. The air smelled of salt and decay. Before he could move, he felt something tug at his coat, a light but firm pull. Terrified, he rushed back to the main deck and swore he would never return. It became clear to the townspeople that the Black Pearl was not just a harmless relic. The spirits of the sailors who had once crewed the ship were still aboard, haunting its every corner. Some said the ship had been caught in a violent storm all those years ago, and the crew had been lost at sea. Their souls, never able to rest, were now trapped on the ship, unable to move on. As more stories of ghostly encounters spread, fewer people dared to visit. The ship, once bustling with tourists, now sat alone in the harbor. Its once grand decks were silent, and the wind whistled eerily through its empty halls. No one wanted to risk meeting the ghosts of the Black Pearl.